On this week's show, Rob gives a quick community news update, and then we talk a little Hanford history with Michael Semas as we celebrate the 133rd anniversary of the incorporation of the city of Hanford. This is the Hanford Insider podcast for Monday, August 12th.
Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of the Hanford Insider. I'm your host, Rob Bentley. In community news, the Hanford City Council met last Tuesday evening. During the study session, they received a report from the Department of Parks and Community Services with 5 concept designs to choose from for the expansion of Hidden Valley Park. There's much more work to be done, and it will be a very expensive project, but it's good to have those plans in place in case a significant grant is received. They also approved a zoning change to allow for a 64-unit apartment complex to be built at Centennial and Grangeville, next to the Berkshire Crossings apartments, with plans in the future for a gas station and drive-through that would front Grangeville Boulevard. The next City Council meeting is August 20th. This Tuesday, August 13th, the East Lacey Boulevard Improvement Project funding announcement and kickoff event will be held on East Lacey Boulevard across from the old Spartan Final building at noon. A major infrastructure project planned for years will finally come to fruition following Representative David Valadeo's successful efforts to secure federal funding in the fiscal year 2024 appropriations package that was signed into law earlier this year. The East Lacey Boulevard Improvement Project will involve the widening and reconstruction of East Lacey Boulevard from 10th Avenue all the way to the improvements that have already been made near Costco, providing numerous safety benefits for drivers and pedestrians, as well as a much-needed facelift for a well-traveled corridor that is also home to many of Hanford's businesses. Here are some things coming up on our community calendar. At this week's Thursday Night Marketplace, it's Art in the Park night. The band Motel Drive will be performing. It looks like it's going to be perfect weather for the return of the marketplace after having to cancel for so many weeks. The Remington is hosting a luau on Friday, August 16th at 3 p.m. There will be hula dancing and a performance by Kealoha. Also on Friday night, the King Speedway welcomes the Peter Murphy Classic featuring Kubota High Limit Racing. Visit racekingspeedway.com for more information. On Saturday, August 17th at 9 a.m., Centennial Park will host the Walk with a Doc. If you have an event coming up and you'd like some help getting the word out, let's work together. Send your information to hanfordinsider@gmail.com. Be sure to subscribe to my weekly newsletter to get a complete calendar of events. August 12th marks the 133rd anniversary of the incorporation of our city in 1891, and I'm sitting down now with local historian Michael Semas. Most of you know him from his historical Facebook pages, great pictures and great history, and I've enjoyed my friendship with Michael for a number of years now. We're both on the board at the Carnegie Museum of Kings County, and we have a great opportunity to share history with you today. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you very much.
So, Michael, you know, the history of Hanford, a lot of people have heard James Madison Hanford's name, and they kind of know about the railroad that Hanford was founded on the railroad. But before that time, Hanford had some interesting developments before they actually became the city of Hanford. Can you tell us maybe a little bit about what Hanford looked like and who lived here before it was Hanford?
Well, the original people that lived here probably didn't even live here. They just passed on through, which were the Tachi Yokut tribes that lived in the area. There is evidence of people moving in here as early as 1875, 1876. The family that I'm aware of that moved in at that time was the Coe family, spelled C-O-E, and their descendants still live here today in Hanford. I've walked around downtown Hanford, and I've walked around outside of downtown Hanford along the Southern Pacific Rail line, and it seems to me that the reason why Hanford was where it's at is that it appears to be the highest spot in this area for a railroad. And Hanford's never really had any issues with flooding in a large scale, and it has a lot to do with the fact that it was located where it's at. There were sheep herders that lived here. There were Chinese railroad workers that lived here when the railroad was put in. And you look at the early growth, the maps that were published by Sanborn Fire Map. The first and earliest map that I've seen is an 1885 map of Hanford, and about all of the major businesses that appeared in that were grain warehouses and bars. And I could tell that the town was quite wild at the time. A picture that I have in my collection, it's scanned from the original. Probably the earliest known picture I've seen of Hanford was 1879, and it shows a group of less than savory characters standing out in front of a bar, which was situated on the northeast corner of Doughty and 6th Street. It was you could tell it was quite the wild establishment. So I would say that at this time, it was a cast of characters that are lost to history.
So let's talk about the railroad and its impact on the growth of Hanford. We know that at that time, 6th Street was actually the main drag in Hanford, and that's where, like you said, all the establishments were, the businesses. Tell us a little bit about Front Street, which we now call 6th Street.
Surprisingly, many of the early buildings that existed on Front Street, 6th Street, still survive today. The wooden ones are long gone. Hanford had several devastating fires that preceded its foundation as a city. I'm thinking that in my mind, there's a couple 2-story buildings that are on the north side of 6th Street, east of Doughty. Those were well-made buildings for the time. You head down on the west side of Doughty. Those buildings were also built in the late 1880s, and they are still standing. Outside of that, there wasn't much. I would think there were people that the map that we have only shows that type of activity going on in the city at that time.
Let's move on to the railroad. Obviously, the railroad, in our earlier discussions, we were talking about the different rail lines that were in the valley. Not, now we know, of course, the main line that runs through town that everybody complains about, 50 trains a day. And then we have the line that goes through, Kalinga to Goshen, which eventually, in an earlier interview, I was talking with the High Speed Rail Authority, and they were talking about the reestablishment of the Cross Valley Corridor for passenger travel. So that's pretty interesting. That's in the future.
Yeah.
Probably way in the future.
Yeah, my grandchildren might see it. I mean,
But let's talk about James Madison Hanford and his impact on the railroad and kind of how we got our city name.
James Madison Hanford was the paymaster for Southern Pacific Railroad, and it was his responsibility to make sure that all the employees of the railroad were timely compensated. He had worked for the railroad system for over 40 years, and at his retirement, the railroad offered him the opportunity to name a site and with his name, and this was the spot that was put with his name on it. I don't know if he ever visited here. He could have, but there's nothing really in documentation that talks about that. The railroad, I did some research. I go to newspapers.com, and I went and I found the earliest known advertisement for the city of Hanford, and that was in December of 1876, when there was an article that talked about, come to the new town site of Hanford where you can buy lots and the patent perfect, and you'll be able to establish your business or your home in the new city of Hanford. And there was a special train that went from Goshen to Hanford to do that. And then a few months later, there was also another one that was advertised for the city of Lemoore. And same format of the article or the ad, but it was just the different name of the city. And I have those saved somewhere. It'd be great to make a poster out of that at some point.
So you mentioned the railroad going west through Lemoore, but Grangeville was actually supposed to be the big town. What happened? How come Hanford got all the attention?
Well, to put it mildly, the citizens of Grangeville did not make good with this Southern Pacific Railroad. There was a dispute in terms of who were the rightful owners of lands around the Grangeville area. Was it the railroad, or was it the people that moved onto the property and developed them into the profitable enterprises that they were? And that dispute boiled for several years until the point where the railroad decided that they were going to evict everybody off the property, and it did not go well. There was a gun battle. It's called the Mussel Slough Tragedy, in which 2 people from the railroad and 8 people from the settlers of the area here were killed in the gun battle. There's a lot of speculation that went on there. I have newspaper articles from the time that talk about what happened at that moment. And unfortunately, the marshal, whose last name was Poole, he had, before the battle started, he got kicked by a horse, and he fell and had dirt in his eyes, so he could not see what was happening in terms of who shot first and who shot where. By the time he was able to regain his composure, the incident was over. So it was quite sad at that point.
That is definitely a sad story, and I know many Kings County residents have visited the monument there on 14th Avenue, and they've heard about it, and they know that the slough kind of runs through town in various spots. Let's see, Mussel Slough, it appears in the subdivision that used to be Solar Estates, or is Solar Estates. I've seen it over by Hidden Valley Park on 11th Avenue. It goes underneath 11th Avenue, over by the YMCA. Where's some other spots that you can kind of still see remnants of Mussel Slough?
In my opinion, the name Mussel Slough was more of a generalized term for any of the sloughs that went south from the Kings River. I'm sure there is a Mussel Slough. They're on the maps, but I suspect that the name Mussel Slough was more monikered towards the general areas to where the event happened. I don't think there was a slough there at that time.
Totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Totally makes sense. So the downtown Hanford has been the scene of fires for years, over 100 years, obviously.
Several in my lifetime.
Yeah, we can think of, exactly. We can think of several recent ones over just even the last 5-10 years. But what was it about the fire safety in Hanford that kind of prompted the people in the city to say, hey, we got to do something. We've got to protect ourselves. How did that all come about?
When Hanford was first established, it was built with wooden buildings, and wooden buildings would be lit up at night with candles and other flames, and they'd catch fire and burn down. And what happened was there were several devastating fires over a period of 5 years, which completely wiped out the downtown area of Hanford. Initially, the citizens of Hanford did not want to incorporate as a city because they didn't want to have to pay the city taxes for the fire protection. But what happened was in 1891, when the last fire happened, the insurance companies basically said, we're not doing business with you till you guys get a proper fire protection. And so the citizens were basically, they were forced to incorporate so that they could pay the fees to hire a fire crew to watch the city. Interesting little note was that the original fire station was not on Doughty Street, north of 7th Street. The original fire station was on Harris Street, north of 6th Street, called the Hanford Hook and Ladder. And it was a volunteer fire department. And that was the precursor to the Hanford City Fire Department, was where I have a Sanborn fire map that shows the location of that. And I have a 1913 aerial photograph of downtown Hanford in which you can actually see the building. And it's the only picture I've ever seen of that structure. And it's from a balloon that was taken in 1913.
That's crazy. That's I think, we talked about the fires that we've witnessed. You think of Salmons, you think of,
I was there.
The one down in China, near China Alley,
Yeah, right.
and the China Alley one.
Well, where Jack in the Box, I'm sorry, where Burger King is, that was a major fire. There was a furniture store and a warehouse there that caught fire, and that's the reason why that property was vacant, was because there was a fire that destroyed the structures that were there. There was also a fire on 7th Street. The Tomer Drug is where they're located. And so if you're in 7th Street, just across the street from Hop Forge Brewery, you're going to notice that the buildings are newer in the middle of the block, and that's where that fire was. And I remember I was a young kid when that happened, and the noise of all the fire engines and everything was just incredible.
I'm reading this. So in 1891, and on August 8th, they had to petition Tulare County to become incorporated city, because at that time, Hanford, there was no Kings County. It was Tulare County.
It was Tulare County.
Yeah. And so they did that on August 8th. And then 4 days later, they handed the written articles of incorporation with Secretary of State on August 12th, 1891, which, as I said, marks the birthday of the city of Hanford. And then in 1893, Kings County was formed and Hanford became the county seat.
Correct. So the story about Kings County being peeled off from Tulare County, that in itself is there's a lot of intrigue in that story, because the Tulare County didn't want to lose the Kings County lands from their control. Some of the most lush and verdant farms were in the Lucerne area, which is just north of Hanford, and it was lots of alfalfa and fruit trees, and it was very, very profitable to have those type of businesses within the county reach. The issue was that Hanford was just too far away from Tulare, from Visalia, to do any actual business. It was isolated. Even today, I always say that you have to want to drive to Hanford to come to Hanford. And so the county, at the time, there were people within Tulare County that fought tooth and nail to prevent Kings County from happening. So it was only when Kings County supporters joined forces with Madera County supporters to petition the state to create two counties. And so Madera and Kings County were created out of the same act in 1893.
That's some fascinating history for sure. Let's move on. James Madison Hanford, people think of Hanford history and they think of James Madison Hanford, but you mentioned the Coe family as well. Mm-hmm. I want to touch on H.G. Lacey. We recently experienced the closure of Lacey Milling after many, many, many years, and hope to have their family on soon to discuss their family history and that. But I thought it would be a great opportunity for us to kind of recognize some of the contributions of H.G. Lacey. I know that the Hanford Department of Parks and Community Services is looking at honoring some of the historical figures in Hanford, and I don't think any kind of recognition is right unless it includes H.G. Lacey. What kind of contributions did he make to the area?
Well, Horatio Lacey was quite a visionary for the area here. I would say probably his biggest success was bringing electricity into Kings County, or Tulare County at the time. If you note, just right next door to Lacey Milling is the Southern California Edison transformer station. It's there for a reason. That's because Lacey established it there back in the 1880s. Lacey was the owner of Lacey Milling. He was a fervent promoter of the Hanford area and Kings County. He was also very much into getting the establishment of Flag Day happening within Hanford. Unfortunately, he died before the first Flag Day happened, and it was 1917. So he was just, when you see pictures of him, you can tell that he took up a lot of oxygen in the room. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. It was just, he was a very domineering individual. He had pizzazz. He had an aura, and he worked his magic for the area.
So the next time you're driving down Lacey Boulevard, you can thank H.G. Lacey and his family for all that they did. And once again, a shout out to the family there that has been working so hard to keep that open for many years.
Okay, so how did Lacey Boulevard get its name? Who named it?
That's an interesting one. Let's go.
There was a gentleman here in Hanford, the last name of Lemon, Lemon, and he was an early Portuguese immigrant who did quite well in the Lemoore area in agriculture, but he lived here in Hanford. In fact, the house that he lived in is right next door to the Kentucky Fried Chicken building. That was the Lemon House. And he was offered the opportunity to name the new road that was being built between Hanford and Lemoore at the time. And everybody wanted him to name it Lemon Avenue, and he declined. He says, no, I want it named after Lacey because he had much more of influence than I did.
That's awesome. I hadn't heard that before. That's super neat. Hanford High School. We could spend hours and hours and hours on local history on Hanford High School. And my focus of this part of the discussion won't be necessarily on the old administration building, but I thought it might be fun to talk about the two parts. One is the formation of Hanford High School, where they first started meeting and where their first actual building was. And then the second part of it will touch, since football season's coming up and a lot of people will be visiting the new remodeling of Neighbor Bowl, maybe we could talk about Jacob Neighbor a little bit. So first of all, let's talk about Hanford High School and its origins in town and their buildings.
Hanford High School's first building was constructed out of wood on a piece of property that is bound by Harris, Florinda, Doughty, and Elm Streets. And that area now is called Lacey Park. If you'll notice on the east side of the park, there's a grove of well-established trees that look like they've been there for over 100 years. Well, that was the trees that were around the high school there at the time. That was the site of the high school. It was a beautiful building. It was built in 1895, and then it was remodeled in 1911 because of the amount of population growth within Hanford. And it still wasn't enough room. And so the school board negotiated with the Vieira family and bought the property on the northeast corner of Doughty in Grangeville. And at that time, that was out in the country. It was out in the country. It was away from town. And a lot of the citizens were upset as to why would you be moving the high school out in the country?
Go figure.
Yeah, I know, go figure. So there were several attempts by the board to raise enough money to build a high school there. And the first bond issues that were presented to the voters failed. They failed because the voters felt that the school was not needed or that it was too extravagant. And so the bond issue was then reissued as a smaller amount, and that failed as well. And third time they brought in a smaller bond issue, and then people began to see the need for having another high school, so they passed it. The problem was that it was not enough money to build the school, and that doomed that building, the administration building, from the very beginning, because they ran out of money when they were building the high school, and they had to slap it together to get it up. And that's what created the structural deficits that plagued that building to the very end. Now, people are going to say, hey, that building, you couldn't knock it over, everything like that. Well, everybody was out front watching the columns going down, but in the back, every time that the ball would swing to knock the column, the theater, the stage area was collapsing without anything hitting it. And that was the problem. So again, we could have a whole hour just talking about that. And so the high school went out in the country, and when you see aerial photographs from, like I have one from 1924, It's in the middle of the country. It's out in the middle of nowhere.
So in those maps, you also see a stadium-like field and a track on the Doughty Street
Yes.
side, which
Yes.
was a precursor to the stadium.
Correct. Yeah. So the original high school track was north of the high school, and there was a stadium that was built there. It was big. According to Victor Rosa, the superintendent of Hanford High School, if you looked at it today, there's no way that would pass ADA or OSHA requirements. And it looked rickety. So what happened was in 1935, the high school was contacted the Works Project Administration, and they were able to secure funds to construct a bowl, which was on the east side of the high school. And it took about 5 or 6 months for them to build it. And then there was discussion about, it was basically a dirt hole. So they had to come up with a different way of finding money to put in the seating. And then the bowl was formally dedicated in October of 1936 into quite a bit of fanfare at the time.
So it was a bowl, it literally a bowl. I can only imagine. One of the common misconceptions is that it was Neighbor Bowl to begin with, and that didn't come till later.
No. It was named after Jacob Neighbor, who was the superintendent of schools there for the high school superintendent from 1918 through 1930s. I don't remember when he was retired. And it wasn't really named after him until after he died. And so you look at it today, it looks different. I mean, it's a construction project that, at the time was built with WPA funds, WPA employees. But again, it's just part of who Hanford is or what Hanford is, and people were proud to have a bowl.
Well, I'm certainly impressed by the remodeling of the stadium. I think it looks great, and I'm looking forward to some football games. Let's go back downtown. And one of the things that Hanford prides itself upon is the preservation of historic buildings. And as you said, Hanford High School Administration Building was not going to be saved. But there are buildings downtown that groups are working to restore or trying to secure funding. We think of the Kings County Courthouse, the Civic Auditorium just underwent a big remodeling, the Episcopal Church. There's so many historical buildings in downtown, including the Carnegie Museum of Kings County. Can you speak to maybe some of the restoration efforts of some of the buildings downtown, and then we can talk specifically about the Carnegie?
I've always said that the Hanford High School administration building was sacrificed to preserve the rest of Hanford. I think it woke up the community in terms of being able to say, we can't allow this type of destruction to happen. You go to other towns in the area, and a lot of their lovely buildings that they had are gone. Fresno comes to mind, Visalia, Tulare. Well, Visalia not so much, but Tulare comes to mind. It is quite sad. Hanford has been fortunate that many of the buildings that are in downtown are owned by families and people that live in the area. So they have to look at the quality of the building on an ongoing basis. And these people, these families have been very instrumental in maintaining the integrity of these buildings. I was walking down Main Street just the other day with a fellow member of the Rotary Club, and I pointed out there is a particular building that is just east of the Opera House. And I said, that is the last building in Hanford, downtown Hanford, that has the original facade on it. On 8th Street, the original facade would be the Oddfellows building. That still has the original facade as well. But it's a building that where Bernstein's Bakery was, and it was right there. It still has the original facade on it. A lot of money's been spent. Sometimes what happens is some buildings, the building that's on the corner of 7th and Doughty, on the northwest corner of 7th and Doughty, the second floor has been abandoned. It just costs too much to bring in that for access for elevator and everything else. So the second floor has been abandoned, but the first floor is pretty much rented out.
Is that the law offices where they used to have the Christmas decorations? Or are you thinking of the one that had that bridals next to
The bridal salon.
Oh.
The bridal, yeah.
Yeah, that had a fire recently too.
Yeah, I had a fire recently too. Well, Hanford has tried the Griswold LaSalle office, which was Hanford Furniture. There was a lot of money that went into that to bring that building up to the code that it's at. It's a 3-story building, and the first 2 floors are occupied. The 3rd floor is not occupied, but if somebody wanted to, they could rent that out and build it out and have office space on the 3rd floor.
Is that the building that used to be 4 floors, and then there were the fire?
There's another fire there. The building we're talking about is on Dowdy and 7th. It used to be Hanford Furniture. For those of us who live in the area, it used to be the building where the bear would spin in the window for Christmas decorations. If you go west 1 block, the Opera House was initially built as a 3-story building. And there was a 4th floor added sometime in 1913, 1914, and that lasted about 10 years, 12 years until a very large fire destroyed the Kuttner-Goldstein building, and the flames blew across the street and burnt the 4th floor off of the Opera House. So fortunately, the Opera House was not demolished. It was completely remodeled. So it was, again, another fire. Even though we have the city of Hanford, we still have fires.
So let's wrap this up with the Carnegie Museum. You and I are both very involved in the restoration efforts and fundraising and putting on exhibitions. And when I'm in the museum and people come in and they ask, okay, so why is it named the Carnegie Museum? How did Hanford get this museum from Andrew Carnegie?
Andrew Carnegie was an early multimillionaire within the United States. He made his money in Carnegie Steel, and he decided that he wanted to divest himself of much of his wealth. So he gave monies to communities all through the United States to build libraries with his name on it. And Hanford was fortunate enough to receive a $12,500 grant to build the library that we see there today. We're very fortunate to have that library because that's the only one left in the Central Valley. Fresno had one, Selma had one, Tulare and Visalia had one, and Bakersfield had one. Those are all gone. Bakersfield was destroyed by the 1952 earthquake, but the rest of them were demolished. And part of the reason why I think that Hanford's has survived has been not only because of the people not wanting to see another fiasco with the Hanford High Administration building, but because it was built using superior products and using superior construction methods. At the time, in 1905, a new construction process came out called the concrete block. And if you look at that building, it looks like it's cut stone that surrounds the bottom part of that building, but that is poured concrete block. And there was a machine that was brought in from Southern California along with the crew to operate that, and they poured those blocks on site. It was a new construction method that had never been used before in the area. The architect was James McDougall, and McDougall personally supervised the construction to make sure that everything that was put in that building was of the highest quality and construction methods used. And that's part of the reason why you see that the building still stands today, 120 years almost, that it stands there. Right after it was built, the San Francisco earthquake hit, and there was concern that the building was damaged, and there was a newspaper article where McDougall came down to personally inspect the building, and other than a couple small cracks, nothing really happened. So he was pleased that the building survived the earthquake, so to speak. So it survived because of being superior, built well, and it also survived because the community really took interest in that building. There's a story, I'm not going to get into it now, about just why is it located where it's at. There was a battle at the time as to where we're going to locate that library.
You mean to tell me there was a controversy over a building in Hanford with the city council?
There was a group of people that wanted to put it somewhere else. And like I said, that'll be another story.
Yeah. You know, Michael, it's been so fascinating to hear some of these stories. Many of them I've heard for the first time, just even in my short time studying Hanford history. And I want to thank you for coming on the show. I know you've published several books that people can buy either on Amazon.
Yes, I did a book in 2005, Kings County and Vintage Postcards. And then in 2007, I did a book with a gentleman who's passed on. It was on Fresno in Vintage Postcards. And then in 2009, I did a third book with a gentleman from North Carolina on Shaver, Huntington, and Hume Lakes in Vintage Postcards. So you can get those all on Amazon.
Yeah, fascinating history. It's not just Hanford, it's the whole valley. Michael does presentations throughout the valley to different service organizations and clubs that are interested in history. And you also have a very active Facebook page, which people love to see your pictures. How many pictures do you think you have on that?
I tried to do an inventory the other day and I lost count at 6,000. I just said, okay, I've got more than 6,000. And it's just a scratch of my personal collection.
Well, that's awesome. There are people that are inspired by your pictures and pictures that we post on the You Might Be from Hanford, if you remember this Facebook page, which I run along with Michael and several other moderators. Hanford history is very interesting, and that's why people come and visit Hanford. And maybe someday they'll actually be able to sit down in Superior Dairy and have an ice cream.
Oh, that'd be wonderful. That'd be sure.
All right. Thanks, Mike, for joining us.
Thank you.
Michael's Facebook page can be found on Facebook at Antique Images from the collection of Michael J. Semas. Like you said, there are thousands and thousands of interesting historical pictures posted there. As many of you know, I run a Facebook page called You Might Be from Hanford, if you remember this. It's also a great source for local history. Before I close this segment out, I'd like to challenge each of you to use your smartphone or other device and interview people in your life that have interesting stories to tell. You may not write a book or run a Facebook page, but it is an important way to document history for future generations. I'm excited to announce that this month I'm beginning a series of interviews with some of the residents at the Remington. I can't wait to get started. I was thinking the other day that children these days don't have the opportunity to thumb through picture albums like we did when we were growing up, because so much of our photography is saved on smartphones. Print out some pictures sometime. I just did it at Walgreens last week. It's still a thing. Finally, if you find yourself with a box of photos that you don't know what to do with, give Michael Semas or myself a call, and we'll be happy to take them off your hands. Future generations will thank you for it. Well, that's all the time we have for this week's show. If you enjoyed this podcast and you'd like to show your support, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/Hanford Insider to make a donation. I'd like to thank my anonymous donor this week for your generous donation. If you'd like to join the Hanford Insider email list, stop by my website at hanfordinsider.com to sign up for updates. You'll also get an exclusive copy of my newsletter in your inbox each week. You can send me feedback by voicemail through the website by clicking on the microphone icon. I'd love to hear from you. Your comments may even be shared on the show. I also need your help getting the word out about the show by liking and sharing on social media or telling a friend. For more information about the show, you can find this podcast on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, and YouTube at Hanford Insider. If you have a show idea, be sure to email me at hanfordinsider@gmail.com and I'll look into it. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the cooler weather and have a great week.